What's going on, guys? Welcome back. That was the wimpiest hey. How's it
Wow.
going, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Returned It Resolves podcast. Will, how are you doing?
Three. Dude, I'm good. I'm solid. It's been just a pretty quiet weekend.
Good. Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a quiet weekend from time to time, so that's a good thing. Hey, we got a new follower. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kentonite. I think I'm
Thanks for
saying that correctly. Welcome. Thank you so much for following. We really appreciate it. Today, we're talking about tips to help you get better at Magic. We've got a lot of things that we've learned in our, we'll say, failures of learning the game, but hopefully trying to get better at the game, and some things that we think are really, really important for getting to know how things work and just really making sure that you're doing all you can to be the best player that you can be. And we've got a lot of stuff for that. So we've each kind of compiled a short list. We're going to be
Yeah.
talking about those one by one as we go through. But before that, Will, it's my favorite time of the week. It's random card of the day time.
Oh, I love this time as well.
It's
Honestly,
really
this is
fun.
works.
It is
Throw it
really
at
fun time. All right, 3, 2,
Cross my
1
fingers for planes.
for planes. Oh, is it gonna do it? There we go. Furnace Whelp. Oh, you know this card. It's a 2/2 for 2 and 2 red, flying. Pay 1 red. It gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn.
Solid.
It's like a fine limited card.
Yep, exactly. Not much
That's
to say about
about it.
it. Uh,
There's not a ton to say about Furnace Whelp. It's a perfectly fine. I mean, it's an evasive threat that covers one of the bread things, which is really important. And you can fire breathing it, so you can kind of plus it up every once in a while and get a lot of damage in. But generally, it will trade up. But it is a 4 mana spell, so that's a hefty amount for a 2/2. But again, with flying, that's pretty worth it.
yeah. So with flying and then the trash, not Gaunty. Fair enough.
Alex,
Um,
welcome.
so I mean, one of my favorite things about it is obviously you can pump it on the stack, but you can also pump it while you're blocking. So in a game, it kind of spills over into some other areas. So if you're in a losing position, it's not the worst creature to pull because it can end up trading with a bigger threat that your opponent might have
Right.
played, a bigger bomb. So
It also
yeah,
provides a really important, and we talk about these in Limited from time to time. It's a very important thing to have kind of a mana sink every once in a while because it adds a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more options to the board. And
is it
so
only red though? So
it is only red, so you are very pigeonholed into that, we'll say. But if you're in a red focused deck, usually a 2-color deck. If you're in Limited, maybe 3 if you're pushing it. Depends on the format, but
right.
generally you will have at least a few red mana available. You'll have at least 2 after playing it at some point
Yeah.
to be able to sink into this if you need to. So it's just nice to have that option.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Cool.
Smelling what you're stepping in, bud. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's really about it, though, for Furnace Whelp. Not a super exciting card. Will, I forgot to ask. What are you drinking?
Well,
This is a new portion of the podcast where we are always drinking some alcoholic beverage as we do this.
it's mostly water.
Oh, what?
It's beer.
Okay, good. Well, I'm drinking scotch again. Surprise.
I thought about almost finishing off the scotch I have, but I was
What
like, you know
scotch
what?
do you have?
The Monkey Shoulder.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Monkey
nothing-
Shoulder's good
I'm not-
stuff.
It is. It's fine scotch. I'm not gonna buy anything fancy if it's whiskey. Well, if it's scotch, I should say. But
Yeah. No, I get you.
I've had like plenty of whiskey over the last few days, so I'm
Yep.
like, let's tone it back.
I feel
Yeah.
you. I get
I've
you.
got enough hair on my kneecaps after these.
Hair on
beverage.
your kneecaps after this. I love
Yeah.
that.
What else is whiskey good for? I think it's hair juice.
It is hair juice. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Well, wow, what a great starting segment for this. That's
Your mom
fantastic.
told you it was egg yolk. No,
No,
it's hair.
it's
whiskey.
scotch. Anyway, like we talked about at the beginning, we are going to be talking about some tips to help you get better at the game throughout this episode. If you have a question about anything in particular, feel free to share it in the chat. We will take some time at the very end and kind of go through those. If they apply in the moment, we'll of course kind of talk about those as they are relevant, but we'll try and answer any bigger questions towards the end when we've got a little bit more time to just focus on them. But we've each come up with a list of 3, and I think, Will, you've come up with a bonus tip, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, because we had ours independently, but we each thought of one that is exactly the same, and it's probably the most important tip, I think.
Yeah,
so
I think so too.
We'll save it for the end. I'll kick us off with that because it's a relatively short one.
Okay.
Since we all love limited, and we know how fun limited is, it might be a little intimidating to sit down for the first time and pull open a pack, and you might think that, wow, I'm going to go into this so rusty and all that. No, baby boy, girl, or girl. Mock draft. There's a few different resources out there where you can rip open a virtual pack and go through a round of 3 packs and kind of see what's in the deck, kind of feel like these things should come back to me now and then. Now, it's never perfect, right? The human variable is very strong, but it's always good to kind of know what strong cards will and won't rotate. And the best resources for those will often kind of apply human tendencies into their algorithms.
Yeah, there's actually, so if you look at, to name a couple of these, DraftSim is a good one. Draft.cardsphere.com is another good one.
Right, we drafted a bunch on Cardsphere. I think we did it for a podcast show once.
Yeah, in fact, we did. And it's a very nice tool. And as you mentioned, there's some things that you can actually apply to the draft to make it more realistic. So, for instance, not that this should be the case, but you can ask for the bots to value drafts, so that way they weigh cost into their draft pick. You can also do just value draft, but also just tons of other little pieces as you go through. So a suggestion would be to try that. I don't like always saying bots value draft personally, because I think if you're in a competitive environment and trying to limited draft, or excuse me, just draft, I don't think that value drafting is technically the right thing to do. But we all know that it does happen, and so if you want to apply that, you certainly can. But all that to say, there are a lot of really, really nice tools out there, and I actually really like that one. I think as part of that as well, and this will spill over into some other things that we'll talk about later, but there are tons of content creators out there. Go watch some drafts before you draft. There's a lot of options. Go hang out with some people in Twitch. Go watch on YouTube, whatever you need to do. But there are pros out there that do this on a regular basis. This is what they do. Go watch them. They know what they're doing. They've put in a lot of effort to know exactly what or at least attempt to know exactly what the best card at any given time is. Nobody's perfect, but they're doing the best that they can, and so they can relay that information to you better than anyone else.
Yeah, LSV on his podcast always ranks and rates the word drops in terms of limited efficacy.
Yeah.
And I think it's specifically limited. And so if ever I'm going to an event or going to play something online where I'll need to draft, I'll have listened to that once or twice.
Yep.
And I kind of know what I like to play with. More so than what is just good, because every color is going to have good cards in it. That doesn't mean you just put a pile of 3 colors and the good cards together.
Yeah.
Well, you know how to draft. Our audience is full of intelligent, tip-top Magic players.
Absolutely. They're better than we are, which is funny because we're the ones giving the terrible tips. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm with you there, though.
I have full confidence in our community.
I do as well. Well, to move to my first tip.
There it is. Alex has my favorite limited deck archetype.
Always.
If it's not red black, it's blue white flyers.
Red black is your go-to 100%.
Red black is really fun. It's always solid when there's really good black removal, or excuse me, red removal. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
It's versatile and you can hit face. Anyway. Next. Practice, people.
Yeah, so my first tip of the evening actually applies to all formats.
First or first?
First.
Oh, I thought you were going to push them together.
Yeah.
Really arch your back. Bend and snap.
Oh, wow. We're great. This applies to all formats. This is, in particular, really getting to the nitty gritty of why you're building your deck the way you're building your deck and avoiding just net decking. Now, when I say just net decking, I want to reiterate the just part, because I don't actually think net decking at its core is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think, however, it's good to just pull a deck, say, okay, I'm going to go play in a competitive tournament and it's going to go great. That's setting really terrible expectations for yourself, and I promise you it will not go well. But what I do think is fine is going in, looking at decks online, figuring out the kinds of things that you want to try and play or the things that you want to try and build, and then use that as a template or as a basis, and then apply, ask why for every single card. Go through and say, okay, why is this Uro here? Why is this Uro is just a good card? Why is this Risen Reef here? But why are these cards in here? Because sometimes the answer will be it's related to a particular tournament or something like that, where they're expecting to see a lot of Jund Sacrifice. So you may see Grafdigger's Cage in the main deck a little more often than you would in a tournament where that's not the case. And so you have to ask yourself, why is every little thing in there? And then also ask yourself, what is my goal? If your goal is to, we got another new follower. Pillar Wolf, thank you so much. Heck yes. Look at that. 2 new followers already. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
But ask yourself, what exactly is my goal with this deck? Is it to be a very good competitive player? If so, you should try and tool that deck out a little bit more. You should try and look at the whole meta and try and look at the decks that you expect to be up against, and then try and find answers to those. If you're actually just trying to build a deck for fun because you really like a certain strategy and you just want to go all in on that strategy, don't worry about the rest of that stuff. Just have fun with it. Find some cards that are really, really exciting for you, but that work in the deck, and then just build around those. Have a good time with it. And so I think too many people kind of get wrapped up in I just pull a deck because I want to try this, or I just pull this and then I really just want to make it my own and all this stuff. I think there's a nice balance somewhere in there. And I think the answers tend to be very focused on your expected outcome, whether that's to be just a fun tabletop player or a competitive Magic player. And so just think about that before you go into the deck building process and before you just kind of jump to say, well, this is the perfect deck for me. 9 times out of 10, you can pull any list you want, but you're going to want to try and finagle it a little bit. You're going to find things that don't work perfectly with what you're trying to do. And so slow down a little bit, have some fun, plan what that deck is needing to do, and then build to that plan, as well as your own. Proxy, yeah, take your time with it. Alex, essentially, that's all I said in the last 5 minutes. There you go. That's my
Alex. He's got a way of getting right to the point. He
does. Saint. Alex is a saint. Alex, I'm glad you're hanging out with us, dude.
So we appreciate. Yeah, I think you're right. I am more in favor, I think, of net decking than you are.
Which is funny because I do it a lot. If I'm honest, like when it comes to the gameplay and things like that, granted, I take a lot of time to look through a lot of lists before I like narrow down the one that I want to play for the day. But a lot of times what I do, and I've actually started to change this a little bit, but I'll net deck, pull a list, and then as we go into the stream, I've started to kind of tool it out and change it a little bit as we've gone through. That's what we've done on the last couple, which I like that format better.
Any list you pull is going to be one person's take on the color pie and like the type of deck they can make with those cards.
Yeah.
And it'll be a little different. Like blue-white has, I think, probably the most variance in recent memory.
I played a blue-white deck today, in fact.
Yeah, that's why I'm pulling it out, man.
Look at that. You knew.
Yeah. I think Adventures is probably also pretty versatile. Green, white, red, like whatever the case is. But yeah, like you don't always have to slap down the same list that someone else plays. You can still, find something good out there. I think the best decks in standard or whatever format it is technically are going to have more similarities than differences, and it's going to come down to like how many Scavenging Ooze do you run main board? How many to your point, like are you running Grafdiggers main or sideboard? And typically you see sideboard, but maybe there's a clever person out there who's got it main board and it works out for them.
Funny enough, the reason I bring that exact example up is I was watching the final rounds. Homogenization is a real problem.
Is that I have a small brain. Does that mean they're all the same? Homogenized? They're all
That
the
would make
same?
sense.
Is
But
that right?
the reason I bring up Grafdigger's Cage is I was watching the standard finals today, in fact. And I believe it was it Seth Manfield? He had like no. I'm sorry. There was a different player. It was not Seth Manfield, and I apologize. I don't remember who it is. But essentially, they had 3 Grafdigger's Cages main deck because they were expecting so many like interactions with the graveyard to be happening throughout the tournament. And it turned out it kind of worked because they were in the final round. So like obviously that was a good call. I don't know that they won it. I don't recall, but like that's a very smart way to look at things, is to say, okay, the expected meta is this for this tournament. Omnath was expected to be everywhere, and on Seth Manfield, because I did watch his match, and that's where I got confused on that one. My apologies, but he played Jund Sacrifice as a way to hopefully be able to outpace and outvalue the Omnath deck in just a faster way of handling things. So he's able to kind of trade things off one for one and then ping stuff as it goes through. So like a Lotus Cobra is out, that's fine. We've got a Mayhem Devil, we sack something, we ping it, it's dead. So like they're able to kind of trade all those things off and then ideally take over the game a little bit faster than that Omnath deck is able to if it doesn't have all the pieces on the board. And it worked.
Yeah.
He was in the finals.
If you don't let Omnath build its board, that can get really, really frustrating.
Absolutely.
Isn't quite as good. That's clever.
Yeah, no, it's just a smart play. But again, that's where he's obviously looking to be a very competitive. He is a very successful competitive player, but he's looking to further that. So he's looking at the meta and saying, okay, instead of how can I just play a good meta deck, how can I beat the meta? How can I look at this and say, what's the best tools that I need to put in my main deck to get it where it needs to be? And he did that. You know what I mean? Like he picked a deck that was going to be better against a lot of these decks and maintained to tool it out the way that he needed to.
Nice for him is that Omnath is still around 40% of the meta right now.
Yeah.
So it's probably a good call.
That Omnath deck, my goodness.
Yeah. It has technically dropped a couple points, I think, but
yeah, technically, but I mean,
not by many.
Okay, well, we've each gotten one tip out of the way. I just want to remind everybody, if you've got any questions for us, please feel free to leave them in the chat. We will talk about those at the end. Alex, I appreciate you hanging out with us and having some fun. Will, what's your next tip?
Hi. Hey. Cool. This is one that took me not forever, but really kind of changed the way I play once I understood it a little more. And that's learn the stack, boys and girls. The stack is so important when you get into really grindy games. I guess more important depending on the deck you're playing. Control, aggro V control.
That's a tough one.
That's wild. I think, okay, we have a real world example that I think is probably, this is how my kind of magic sensei taught me, so to speak, how to think about the stack and why it's important. If you're playing like I don't know, it's a 3/3 something. It's a 3/3 ball of yarn. So your 3/3 ball of yarn
is
attacking in. And if you cast Wild Growth, or let's say Giant Growth, because that's +3/+3, play Giant Growth for 1 green on your guy, all while you're attacking. It's a 6/6 swinging in. All right, I pass priority now. But they've got a Lightning Bolt. And they bolt them. Sorry, I'm doing it backwards. They attack.
You're getting this really well.
No, I screwed it up. Hold on. Help me out.
So you're saying if you're attacking in with a 3/3 ball of yarn, it's important that it's a ball of yarn.
I really got on that
you
example.
Pass priority. Then they play Lightning Bolt in response to the attack. And then in response to the Lightning Bolt on the stack, you play the Giant Growth, which then saves it from the Lightning Bolt and ideally still gets the damage in.
Yeah, I was doing it backwards first.
Yes.
Just to illustrate that your guy would die and you'd lose a spell.
Yeah. And let
So
me just
if you
say that to this
right.
point, like that's a very basic example. That's something that I think most people can relate to, especially if you've played limited where they've, played any burn spell and you've got a combat trick in your hand. It's worth noting that yeah, you can generally save your creature with it. That's something we can generally relate to. But if you look in particular, and this I I'm not going to exclude for other formats, but in particular, if you look at like the older Eternal formats, the
Mhm.
stack gets massive. So like
I'm not even. I'm not gonna dip my toes into
it is,
anything past modern. Is
yeah, it gets
here's
very
all I'm
crazy because all of a sudden, and even in modern, you've got things like Storm, and those all add to the stack. Or you've got like Counter Wars, which happen a lot in Control v Control matchups, where you've got a really big Haymaker spell. Say it's your Planeswalker or something big that's ideally the card that's going to take over the game for you. Obviously, the opponent, being a control player, they know that style of deck. They know how that's going to play, so they're holding up their counter for it. Well, on the other hand, if you're, on the opposite side, you're playing your Planeswalker out, you should probably hold up a counter on the backside too. And so, like, it just gets more and more back and forth, and sometimes it can really go ham, which is really fun. The more
yeah.
competitive and older you get, Alex, I love it. But it really can get very hectic, and understanding that, I think that's a really good point. Understanding that, at least in some way, and hopefully, finding more and more about it as you go is really important. So
Most
yeah,
def-
I'm with you.
yeah. I mean, it's big in Commander as well.
Yeah,
Um, and understanding what you can and can't respond to.
yeah,
Uh, that's important, as well as when the best time to play that spell is on the stack.
yes.
Uh, the order
Um,
in which it's resolved. That's you know, there's you can make an entire podcast probably about the
oh,
stack.
easy, easy,
That's a
easy.
quick, that's a
Um,
quick kind of a pit stop on the stack.
Yes. But do pay attention to that. Do make sure that you understand how interactions work. And I will just say, especially if you're in arena or online, but even in person, and especially if you're in like a good friendly kind of play group, if you're just having some fun, just try stuff and just be like, hey, does this work the way I think it will work, or does it just flop? If you're trying to like, if you're just learning a deck on arena, for instance, I've done this a lot. I've done this on stream a number of times. If I'm not 100% sure how something is work, oftentimes, even if this means I'm going to lose the game, this knowledge is going to help me win games in the future. I'm okay with trying it once. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. I now know. I'm gonna remember because I lost a game because of it. But if like Will, for instance, when you and I play, a lot of times I know like we are. I like to think very respected towards each. What we respect each other is what I'm
Yes,
trying to say. And so
you're
we'll take the time and just say like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't know that that's the best line, or I don't know how that actually interacts. And then we'll take the time to look it up before we actually play through. And if you're in
yeah.
a good friend group, please do that. Take the time to learn, take the time to make sure that you're correct on it. There's tons of resources out there that you can learn a lot about the stack. We might it might be a good idea to do a podcast on it, a dedicated podcast on it at some point. But in the meantime, there's plenty of options out there for you. So just a heads up. That's a really good one, though. The stack is so important.
It's probably the most complicated part of Magic. You know,
100%.
like all of us have thrown a pile of cards together at one point.
Yeah.
But learning the stack really takes a lot of failure and good, like patient teaching,
Yes.
or
I
your
agree.
own like dig. So yeah, all right, bust me with more knowledge, Kev.
All right. So here is overarching knowledge. In any given situation, this applies to so many aspects of the game. It applies to every single format. It applies to just your patience level. Slow down. Always slow down and take the allotted time that you have. Even if you're on arena, run that timer down. That's fine. Take the time to figure out the best thing for you in any given situation. We've kind of already talked about when you're deck building, don't just net deck, but slow down. Take the time to apply the cards that you need to the deck that you want.
Yeah,
Also think through and figure out what exactly you're trying to do, but slow down in other aspects of this. So when you're looking at the stack is a good example. Make sure that you understand, slow down, take the time to think it through. Okay, if I do this, what are the options that they have on the backswing? What are how does this actually interact before I just jump the gun and say, okay, I'm going to do this? Before you look at, the start of your turn, you draw your card and you've said, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. Well, hold on, take the time, slow down, make sure that you look through every option. It may be very clear what the option is, but oftentimes you will find a different line, and whether or not that's the right line or not, you at least know it is there. And then that way, when you go to look at the game after the fact, whether you've won or lost, you can take that time and say, okay, that either helped me win, or that maybe didn't get me to the win. Maybe the other line would have helped me out better, and you can think through that a little bit better. I also want to apply this to something really important, especially as you're learning the game and if you're learning how to be competitive. A small like side tip that I generally do is if I'm really interested in a particular deck, I will go watch a pro play it. We've kind of talked about LSV and some other players. They're pros. They know what they're doing. They're a great example of what to do and how to think through everything. But one thing that they sometimes don't do super well is taking the time to just say, okay, well, here are all of my options, because they don't have the time. They're playing a game. They don't have all the time in the world to do that. And so while they do think through those options and they're just very fast at it, they don't always see every line and so and explain every line. So one thing I like to do every once in a while is I'll watch a deck that I really, really am interested in by a pro player. I will let them draw their card and then pause the video and then try and determine, okay, what are all the lines? What are all the possibilities? Sometimes it's really easy to say, okay, well, play that Woe Strider on turn 3. Okay, but they've also got a Mayhem Devil, so maybe they want to play the Mayhem Devil first, or maybe they want to play the Woe Strider. Which one's the better option and why? And so pause the video, think about what you would do, and then just play the video and see what actually happens and see if what you did lined up with what the pro was doing. They're not 100%, they're not perfect, but they are a good benchmark for you to aspire to be if that's your goal. And so slowing down in that regard as well is really, really important. And again, this draft picking, slow down during your draft picks, use up the time. You've got plenty of time. Slow it down. Make sure that you're not just picking the rare because it's the rare. Make sure it's actually good for the deck that you want to build. Just tons of applications for slowing things down. To be honest, you can really just think about that all the time. Alex, as someone who plays competitively, knowing rules and interactions is the most important part when it comes to winning games consistently. That being said, I'm no pro. Alex, knowing the rules is very important. I am with you. And especially in competitive, you really have to understand how things work. But overall, slow things down.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like to play dumb decks because I think less about that. But even in my very basic, mostly red, potentially other fun color combinations, there is going to be a turn when I have to say, okay, wait, what's the best thing to do here? I have plenty of threats to play. I have a big guy to play. What's the best thing to do?
Yep.
So reassessing the game state is always something that needs to happen.
And a lot of times I will say, in addition to just slowing down, think ahead, because a lot of times you look at a board state and things don't necessarily go the way you expect them to go on your opponent's turn or at the end of your turn. And so things do change. So to your point, assessing the board state is always an important thing to be doing, and planning ahead for a turn ahead. Like, always plan for the next turn. What's going to set me up best to do what I need to do? If you're just in a, silly red aggro deck, sometimes that's less important, I will say, but it still is always a crucial thing to know what's going to happen.
I learned this lesson the best when Supreme Verdict was in Standard. And in my head, the equation was have guy play guy. But I had to learn that, all right, if I'm stomping face pretty early on, and if I have all my boys in one place, they could all die to one thing. So let me hold a couple back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't want to overcommit.
I played like a really tier 2 crappy Jund value kind of deck for a few weeks there. That was really fun, but it taught me a lot about, learning how to not screw up. That's all I'll say. And not throw a game.
Screw up. What a
not throw a game. That's probably the better way to say it.
I will
Yeah.
say you're exactly right. That's very easy to do with aggro decks. I
Yeah.
I think the line, like not looking at necessarily what the other deck is doing, generally the line that the aggro deck takes is a relatively simple one. But there are things like that come up that, again, knowing, how to really properly deal with those threats and how to assess that as a board state at any given time is really important, and that's where that comes in. So I'm with you there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Number 3. This one is I've heard it kind of described as like the most boring part of Magic, and I would agree. It's the part that I think no one likes when we deck build, and it's the most frustrating part for a newer player. And that is knowing your mana base and knowing how to build.
Yeah.
We talked last time about how we need Magic to fix it. How mana screwed is the biggest turnoff for new players. Why would you play a game sometimes that doesn't let you play just because that's how the cards fall? I get it. That being said, while that's still an element, we need to learn how best we can circumvent it. And this is another kind of point or topic that you could make an entire, like an hour-long show about. So we'll hit the highlights. It is always important, no matter the format you play. That being said, it probably needs to be more psychoanalyzed and picked apart and constructed. Of course, when you need to be more consistent, when the games go faster. So for limited, just briefly, it should really. I tend to stick to 2 colors in limited if I'm feeling froggy. I will splash something in limited maybe, but to me the downsides of splashing far outweigh the upsides, so I tend not to, and that's just you don't get to play your things.
Yep.
And that's kind of it.
No,
I
was just gonna say I'm with you on that. Like the mana base, as you kind of mentioned, is really generally the most unexciting portion. They've tried, I will say there have been efforts to make it more exciting. We've got man lands and things like that in particular formats, but it's still not a super exciting.
So control decks don't have to play creatures.
Exactly.
That's the only reason.
I'm with you. But in general, it's a really boring piece of the puzzle, but it's probably, I think, you look at it like a house. If you don't have a foundation, like a good, strong foundation, the rest of the house doesn't matter. You can have the fanciest thing in the world, but it's going to fall in the dirt because there's no foundation there. And so that the mana base really is the foundation of your deck. And so making sure that you properly allot, the amount of fixing per color to a deck, whether that's constructed or limited, is really, really important. And knowing when to stretch the mana base and when not to. I think you brought that point up really, really well in limited. Generally 2 color is the suggested way to go. If you can get to 1 color, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It really depends on the cards. I think you sacrifice card quality sometimes to do that, but you obviously get more consistency with the mana base. However, balancing that is really the key, and I think knowing when to splash an extra color, you really have to have something really impactful on the game, and something that's going to say, okay, here, I kind of win. You know what I mean? Like, not always is the case, but generally speaking, if you're splashing, you should really be wanting to like end the game with that card or do something really spectacular with that card. And if you're not, I think it's worth saying, despite how much you may love that card, that doesn't matter when it comes to winning the game.
If I'm drafting a blue-white flyers list, let's say an Innistrad, and I have Griselbrand, well, not Innistrad, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I pull Griselbrand, I'm like, oh god, I should probably play this. It's Griselbrand. But if I'm on pack 3, I have probably 80 to 85% of my deck like pretty much thought out. Obviously, I'm going to take it, but am I going to play it? That's the big question. That is an expensive card. Yes, it's a bomb, but now I'm relying on, what, is it 3-colored black?
I think it's 3-color black.
I think that's right.
I was looking to see if I have my Innistrad binder here, or my, what set is Griselbrand in? Alex, you know. It's
Yeah,
not. It's not. Thank you for black.
right. That's the cost.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Thank you. That was the inconsistency. Was there was a lot of sevens and the mana cost was 8, which
Yeah,
I thought was
I couldn't
really
remember if it's
funny.
3 or 4 and 4, but yeah, Griselbrand is too expensive to play in anything that's not playing black.
Yeah.
So while that's the card that, yeah, you want to splash, you probably don't get to.
Yeah.
Like that's the case.
It's just a
So
bit much.
right. So for limited, um, one consideration is the cost of playing your lands, and that is really pretty negligible. So the steepest cost to new players, make a distinction here, to new players is going to be anytime paying life.
Yeah.
That's going to feel very bad. Pain lands, shock lands, fetch lands. New players tend to shy away from cards like that. So they don't want to pay life to play mana. When in reality, to fix your mana on curve, it's probably worth it to pay a life or two along the way. Maybe not so much if red is really strong in the meta. Who knows? But that's probably
that's a really easy trap that you bring up for new players, is to like conserve that life total as much as possible. The reality is, if you win at 1 life, you still won.
right.
Nothing changes. So
you can't just go out there like giving it away and not
just shock myself, shock for fun. You know, like you can't do that. But think of it more as a resource, not as something to conserve. Is kind of the mindset. That's kind of a side tip on its own, but life is a resource. Problem.
Exactly. Thank you,
Alex. Perfect. Alex is summing up these tips so well for us.
that message came across like right when I said it real time, so that's perfect. The biggest cost for playing lands in actuality is lands that enter tapped.
Yes.
They made kind of ways to circumvent it. They've made tap lands come in and you gain a life. They made tap lands come in and you scry. That's a little better than getting a life, but it's still not awesome. Bounce lands you can play around with, so that's a whole other thing. It's not really a cost, but entering tapped is a problem. If you're fixing your mana base and you notice you have a majority of tap lands, that should be a red flag that your deck isn't going to be very quick.
Yep.
Tap lands are fine kind of in the early turns when the power on board isn't really there.
Yeah.
Turn 1, it's fine if you're not playing a lot of like 1 mana spells, or if your 1 mana spells are things like Lightning Bolt, or are counters. Like on turn 1, turn 2, you're not gonna need them that badly. But as the game goes on, and you've got a life-saving spell that you can cast, like let's say you're about to draw your Supreme Verdict is kind of cheap, but you're gonna draw a big sweeper or something, and all you need is 1 land. You need a black, and so you draw. Oh crap! But it's the temple. It's like the temple seat or something. Well, you have your life-saving spell, you have your land, but now you can't play it.
Yep.
Like that's the problem. So
what matters very heavily and limited in particular, well, I will say in any format really, is hitting things on curve more than hitting things like that. There's a very huge cost to the tap land thing, because in the early turns, as you're saying, it doesn't quite matter as much. In the very, very late turns, generally you've got enough land to do what you need to do. It also doesn't matter. But the majority of games are won, especially in limited, in that mid, to late-ish portion of the game. And so if you're not hitting your lands on turn, you're not able to throw your threats out on turn. And that really, really sets you back, especially if the opponent's able to do that. We talk about unlimited curving out as one of the like key concepts to winning a good, just a draft game, is curving out. A lot of times, if you just hit a nice 2, 3, 4 in terms of board presence, in terms of just nice, strong creatures, don't have to be the best creatures, but just nice, aggressive creatures, and your opponent isn't able to do that, all of a sudden you are miles ahead. I mean, that doesn't mean you're going to win necessarily, but it does put you way ahead from an opponent who said, oh, well, I've got a 2-drop, but now I don't have anything until turn 5.
Yeah.
That's a huge setback, especially if the opponent's doing a 2, 3, 4 kind of thing. So think about
Yeah.
those things. Absolutely think about those things. Mana base, absolutely the most important portion of this. It is the foundation for your deck. Always think about that first.
Doesn't just come down to necessarily hitting how do I want to say this? Hitting your curve on the numbers. Like sometimes you'll have a 2-drop that you won't get to play on turn 2, even if you have 2 lands or the right lands necessarily. Like let's say it's a 2 black spell, but you're running a black white deck. Like if you're running into that issue, it might be time to trim down your dual mana kinds of spells. There's likely what I've found in kind of, and this goes back to maybe Kevin, your point, looking into net deck lists and trimming some cards and maybe adjusting them. There are cards typically usually in standard, we'll say, that you can substitute for more costly cards. And even though 3 mana is equal to 3 mana, sometimes 3 mana is a white and 2 colorless, or it is a white and 2 blue. Mm-hmm. Now, white and 2 blue is incredibly hard to play. Like if you think about it, if you want to play that on curve, you have to you have to firstly have drawn probably at least 2 lands.
Yeah.
Hopefully you draw 3 if you're playing those colors. But regardless, you have to start with a good base and then hit not a plains. You have to hit an island. It's tricky.
It is. It's very tricky. You have to have the perfect lands, and that is not an easy skill.
Land, but if it's a tap land, that's the same boat.
Absolutely. So that is a very, very difficult skill to master. There's again
I'm not
a lot
saying
of there.
Cards. Let me just pause it. You want to play those cards because they're probably better if they are expensive like that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right. You want to play good cards, definitely, but
there is a cost.
Your deck lacks consistency, there's probably another direction you can go.
Yeah.
You don't need the best cards at every turn if your end game isn't reachable.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That's important.
You want a consistent road to your end game, to your winning strategy, and that's not always I'm just going to have the best cards for each point in the curve.
Absolutely.
That's often not how you win. Now, if you're playing like a mid-range deck, that's kind of what you want to do. But mana bases matter so much more in mid-range than anything else. So
yeah, absolutely.
Then you can talk about main and secondary colors, but let's not, because this could be a whole other.
That could be a whole other episode, which I think it might be. We probably have done that at some point. If you can't pay for things you have access to, perhaps rethink your mana. And lands are like 95% of them. Yeah, agreed. Alex,
like mana dorks that can fix some things, but you also don't count mana dorks in your cost all the time.
Yeah,
that can be
tricky. Again, that skews the math. There's a lot on top of that, even that can do things.
There is. I forgot to mention there is a resource though that I have used for a while to calculate my mana, and that is just manacalculator.com. It's the most simple, like straightforward one that I've ever used. Not a sponsor. I'm just saying.
Yeah, none of the things we've mentioned are sponsors. We don't have a sponsor. If anybody wants to sponsor, hey, how's it going?
Mana Calculator is simple, and it's like the 3 steps. That's the simplest. I didn't give anybody any answers how to calculate your mana, so maybe I should do that.
Yeah.
It's Mana Calculator breaks it down in the exact way that I tried to do it mentally and couldn't figure it out until they helped. Count your colored mana, count your total mana, and then adjust accordingly. That's really simplified, but if you go to the website, if you're having trouble with this kind of point, go to the website, look at it. It'll help you a lot.
Good call. Awesome. Well, we're coming up on our last tip. Again, the one that Will and I both put inadvertently. We did not know each other put these until, a little bit before. But just want to mention as well, we've kind of already talked about it. Alex really hanging out in the chat here. But if anybody else is here, I know there are a few of you here. I see you lurking. But if you have any questions about any of these, or you just have a general question, please feel free to share it. We'd love to talk about it at the end after we kind of round out things. So thank you guys for hanging out.
Came on pretty strong.
Do what?
That peer pressure came on pretty strong.
It did. Give into it. All right. Last and potentially most important thing, obviously it's really about a culmination of all of these, but one of the most important things you can do to be a better player, and again, this applies to any format, really any way that you play the game, know your meta. Know your
No,
meta.
your meta. Good God, know your meta. You
Um,
can't just pick fun cards as much as we want to. If you
yes.
want to win, be victorious, know your meta. You gotta know what's good. Even if you don't want to play what's good,
Yeah.
know what's good. How do you beat it? How do you take Omnath and cut his heels? Her heels? I don't want to misgender Omnath.
Its heels.
Cut their heels.
Their heels. There you go. That was solid. Yes, knowing your meta is not that hard. It just takes time. It's really, there are a ton of resources for you. So when we look at knowing our metas, if you're looking at standard, obviously this is the most commonly rotating series or season, or wow, meta. I'm doing great. I podcast good. Anyway, that's the most rotating meta, so there's a lot of changes there that happen on like a yearly basis, but and really even less than that, every few months we get a new set. Spoiler season. We have set reviews that happen all the time. Go to YouTube. Day 9 is one of the most fun to watch. He is not a pro in that sense, so if you're trying to be a pro, I would suggest someone like Limited Resources with LSV and Marshall Sutcliffe. They are fantastic at the set review stuff. They do it for limited. They also do it for constructed, and for good reason. Obviously, those are separate metas, so you need to be looking at things in that capacity. Look at things in a limited environment. Now look at things in a standard constructed environment. If you're looking at eternal formats, obviously things change less and less as time goes on because there's that card pool just gets bigger and bigger, but things are already kind of pre-established. So really it's less about finding a brand new deck and more about finding how the new cards that are being released at any particular time are going to slot in to the existing metas. Now, again, that's not always the case, so that's where knowing the cards as they come out is really important. Commander is a really good example of a format that gets added to very consistently that can breed new cards and new decks very easily. And Alex, I know you're the Commander player here, so if you're in the chat, that's something you can kind of talk on actually. But yeah, he's the CEDH guy. Like,
what's tricky is, I feel like in the Commander meta, that's just very specific to the people you play with, for one. Not that there aren't good cards, right?
Yeah.
Just that someone's going to have a deck that is very, like, is like the deck to beat, the king of the hill, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, this is the age of the internet. And, like, yeah, things change. The best deck is going to kind of float around. The new crazy combo is going to be out there for Commander, but it's not. You should know those things, but for Commander, you also need to know like who you play with.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of Commander, right? So it's not going to be. Yeah.
Well, and I would suggest too, if you're in competitive EDH, so CEDH, that's the more like. I think it matters significantly more there to stay up to date on everything. If you're playing with your friend group, I think it more applies that you should know the decks that they're playing and maybe just kind of be aware of what's going on there. But Alex, as you mentioned, CEDH changes a lot. That's one that's harder to keep up with, but you certainly should. And CEDH TV is a great option if anybody is looking for like Commander content specifically. Always go to them. They seem to be a really good channel. Alex is a moderator there, so I'm not just saying that because Alex is a moderator. They do very good content. Mons is a really great player as well, so do check that out. But one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention on this is that, you know, if you're looking to get really, really good in a particular format, whether that's standard, whether that's limited, part of knowing your meta is knowing how to play your meta and trying different things. So when you're in standard, for instance, we've talked about Omnath, we've also talked about Jund Sacrifice. It's important to know how those decks play, not just what cards are in them. a
Sure.
suggestion I would have, if funds are available, because I do understand that this is an area where sometimes it can be a bit tricky, especially if you don't have an in-person play group where you can kind of just proxy out cards and try stuff out. But try running the different decks. Try playing with these different decks. Even if it's not the deck you're going to play at the next big tournament, know how it operates, because that way, when you do find yourself up against that deck in the tournament at any given time, you've now got the upper hand to say, okay, I know I've played this deck. They're looking for this particular card to deal with this threat that I've got. And so you know exactly what to expect. And not only is it good to know about those cards, it's really good to know how they're going to play when they either do or don't have it. And so it's really nice to be able to play with it and make sure that you understand it more in and out. We talk all the time about how Magic is really about knowing your opponent and how their deck works as much as it is about you knowing how your deck works. Certainly that varies, because if you're in just a Goldfish deck, then you do your thing and there it is.
Right.
But
playing ad nauseum, just forget everything we
just
said.
forget everything. It's ad nauseum, just do it. But if you're
Just-
playing any amount of interaction, it's really important to try and play with those decks a little bit to know how they're going to work. Easier said than done. 100%, Alex, you're exactly right. But I do think it's really important. Ad nauseum takes thought. It does take thought, but it's also pretty straightforward.
When?
Good point.
When if you don't know what it does and you have to read it,
That's
sure.
True. Reading's hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, knowing your meta.
I'm not saying ad nauseum is bad. It's a fine deck. It wins things, but
I love ad nauseum. It's a fun deck.
both of them take thought. You have to think to read. So I'm with you. But
oh, Will, so rude.
The biggest point for my takeaway is knowing what archetypes are strong in your meta right now. There are always going to be specific decks that fit, or rather don't necessarily fit that archetype. Omnath Ramp is probably the only example right now that I can see. But if you pull up MTG Top 8 right now, you'll see you got some aggro decks in the meta and a bunch of control decks.
Yeah.
Like that's it. It breaks it apart that way. Some of those aggro decks are actually mid-range decks. Some of those control decks are combo decks. But those are the archetypes, really. So understanding right now, all right, these cards are good in the meta, so I should value these other cards higher. Cards like cheaper removal in red, or not even in red, but cheaper removal in like white and black, in things that you can play in decks that aren't necessarily control, but like if red deck wins is really strong, like we had a couple seasons ago, and it's just taking the metagame by storm. If we have solid, efficient removal, like maybe we play a mid-range deck that's going to outvalue it, and our removal is just better than like whatever they're going to play, and we win that way. Or maybe if there's a crazy combo deck running around the meta right now, maybe we say, all right, well, I will play this pretty decent control deck that's got good top end to win, and can just kind of literally control the game state.
Yeah.
If I counter their big nasty Omnath, they don't get to ramp with Omnath. Easy as that.
Yeah.
So
easier
knowing
said
like
than done, but yes, that is the goal.
There's part of my thinking is always like, how do I kill the scariest thing in the room? And that's usually the most popular deck.
Yeah.
That won't always work. And there's a reason those decks are winning.
Yeah.
And you kind of start to flirt with, well, okay, sure, you can beat red deck wins, but can you beat a control deck? And probably not if you're mid-range. So
yeah.
It's going to depend on, again, knowing your meta, knowing what you're good against, and knowing what you can beat.
Yep.
Yes. And
all that to say, know your meta. There's a lot of tools out there, as you mentioned, MTG Top 8. MTG Goldfish is good. Aether Hub is not a bad one as well.
Goldfish is great for a lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. So again, utilize those resources. Make sure that you're understanding what you might be up against and what you have access to. All of those things are very, very important. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the last tip. So I have to pose a question.
To whom?
To you. So we have a few packs here. We normally do a crack-a-pack around this time of the most recent set. I don't actually have any of the most recent set, but I've got some random ones that are technically for subscribers, but also we've got more packs coming in for that particular reason, so it's okay if we open one. So here's my question.
Yeah.
First of all, do you want to open one of these packs?
I mean, if they're right there,
All
you
right.
might as well.
Here's our options. All right.
Okay.
I'm going to do this in the most exciting, or excuse me, in the least exciting to the most exciting, I think.
Okay. Okay.
We'll see if you agree with the order. All
All
right.
right.
Core Set 2020 is here.
Right.
Oath
So
of the Oath of the Gatewatch. Dark Ascension.
okay.
Planar Chaos. And
Okay.
and Original Modern Masters.
Oh, geez. Modern Masters, right?
You wanna do
Planar
Modern
Chaos.
Masters?
Fun though.
It's up to you. I'm good either way.
Let's do Modern Masters. That's more draft.
You wanna do
Well,
Modern Masters?
but I
Alright,
like
if I
modern.
do this, oh, it's not. Hold on. Everybody wait. We have to wait for this camera to come on. Okay. Look at this. I have an
Oh.
extra camera for just this occasion. Let's open up Modern Masters. I set up an overhead cam just for this, and I'm really excited about it. All right. Are we ready?
The fact that this isn't centered is just hitting my butt cheeks in
Is
the
it
worst.
great? All right. Dream Spoiler Witches. Lovely. Reach Through Miss. Imperiosaur. Amru Seekers. Fiery Fall, not a bad card, by the way. Let me focus just a little better. All right. Sataniel, what, this one? Hillcomber Giant. Sanctum Gargoyle, another actually really cool card, I think. Walker of the Grove. Perilous Research, excuse me. Desperate Ritual is our first uncommon. Cloud Goat Ranger, I mean, that's a good one. Dakmor Salvage, very good. Our rare City of Brass, excuse me. City of Ass is a real card, by the way. And then
Yeah.
our foil, Amru Scout. I'm going to be honest. If we're drafting this, Cloud Goat Ranger.
Yeah. All right.
100% the pick.
Easy.
I think that is just way too good not to pick. I mean, there's a lot of actually decent stuff in here, but I definitely think that's the best.
I think your other, what's the 7/7 Green Boy? That's your other option,
The Walker of
probably.
the Grove. Yeah, but this is much less good. It's
I think
really not that great, I don't think.
That's your only
I think it's
other.
actually between Fiery Fall and Cloud Goat Ranger. But I would definitely pick Cloud Goat.
I don't know. You get a 4/4 and a 7/7 for about, what's it, 4 turns before it exiles itself?
It's only when it leaves the battlefield you get the 4/4.
Oh,
So
that's
it's much worse.
not bad.
I mean, Evoke makes it good, but I don't think it's great.
That's not bad.
That's just my opinion.
That's not bad.
I mean,
not the best.
Cloud Goat's definitely the pick.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. 100%.
Alex, you redeemed a highlight on my message. I don't understand what that means in chat. I'm sorry. I don't understand. I might be the only one seeing that. Well, at this point, while we, if there are any questions, again, feel free to let us know in the chat here. But at this point, if we don't have any questions, or while we're at least waiting for one or two, Will, do you have anything outside of Magic you want to talk about?
Yeah. You got to play Among Us, dude.
Yeah, you've been texting me about that like constantly.
Yeah, you got to play that tonight.
Do I?
Yeah, you have to.
I have a fiance waiting for me to go to sleep because she's very sweet and likes to stay up, and that's very kind. And I want to make sure that I respect that.
I don't care.
Well, you should, because you have to hang out with both of us. So she's gonna be mad at you.
She can play it too.
She can. I guess that's fair.
$5 on Steam.
I know. I bought it.
We're playing it tonight. We're gonna break it in.
Are we? I'm gonna
Done.
die a lot, I feel like, in that game.
Dying's a lot.
I'm gonna
It's fine.
suck, though. I mean, that's fine. I'm okay with that, but I'm just saying. I'm not
We're
very
gonna
good.
play. If
Alright.
Kevin's not the worst ever, we're gonna stream it.
Yeah, we've talked
If
about doing some fun stuff with that, so heads up in Discord if you're interested in some cool stuff. That might be
if
coming.
you're a patron and want to just have a swell time, or maybe not a patron, who knows? Who knows?
Alex has a question.
Stormcrab.
Stormcrab?
Next question.
What's my favorite underrated card? I was gonna say Mirror March, but that's not underrated, and it's not in standard anymore.
Sad day.
I know, right? What
That's
is my-
tricky. Underrated.
Yeah. Oh, it's not very well. I don't know that it's very underrated. It's actually seeing some really funny play, and it's not a very great card. But Light of Hope, the 1 mana instant white, 1 white, and it does like one of 3 things. It destroys an enchantment, you gain some life, or you put a 1/1 counter on stuff.
Yeah.
That card is like surprisingly good in a lot of places.
And limited, right?
No, I'm seeing it played as pretty good and constructed. No, here's the reason. Let me be very clear in saying this is not a build around card. This is a card that gets slotted in as like some of the last things and constructed. But there are a lot of 1/1 counter decks going around right now, like Selesnya counters or Golgari or like Abzan counters, things like that. Light of Hope is very, very good, and there's a lot of enchantments that it surprisingly hits. 1 white, do 3 things. Pretty good.
Yes.
I'm saying it's underrated. It's not very, like, it's not amazing. Like,
Yeah. Okay. Fair. That's fine. I haven't good.
Blood Survivor uses it.
Remember
See?
a time in recent history when a counters deck has been good.
It's actually not bad right now.
Like counters decks have usually been high tier 2 or low tier 1.
Yes.
Like best counters deck is when Hardened Scales was in.
Yes, agreed. I think.
Or
if you go all the way back to Affinity, which is technically a counters deck.
Like, I think the best thing this card can do is destroy an enchantment, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Cool.
But the fact that it has synergy with your deck and is flexible enough to do something like that is pretty good. Again, I'm not saying it's amazing. I'm just saying it's been very flexible and actually very useful when I've seen it played.
I'll buy that as being underrated. I think.
Or destroy a creature. Good point. Theros Beyond Death is in. So
true.
And because of blocking, as Alex pointed out.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. And it's a counter. It sticks around. So that's not.
Yep.
It's not the worst.
We said underrated. That's underrated.
Hey. You're right.
Also,
you got me there.
Blur. That was really weird. There it is. It's just a big brown blur.
I don't want any frames. I don't want any frames in this.
Worth noting, guys, at some point in the near future, we're upgrading this setup for both of us, potentially. Because that needs to happen.
Yeah. It is the future, but
yeah,
one day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't played enough with the newest set to really know. I'm not sure, honestly.
Last question.
Yeah.
Thoughts on how flip lands that are non-permanents interact when flickered? AKA they go away forever. It's a really good point. So what Alex is talking about here is the flip lands, or the cards that are flip lands. If you bounce them, they technically inherit what's on the front side, which is always the non-land side if it's got a non-land side. And so if you flicker it, it goes away. I I don't know that I have a significant like enough. That's not happened enough to me to really care about it. I'll be honest. That's like something that's just not been something I've had to deal with. I do understand how it works, and I understand that that could be frustrating, but I think that's kind of a risk that you take on when you put that card in your deck because you are kind of adding a lot of flexibility already. So if you're taking the hit for that, I don't feel terrible about it. But again, that's just my like really quick answer because again, it's not significantly applied to any of the games that I've played. I imagine, Alex, that applies
I hate
really
it.
heavily in CEDH.
I hate it. I think that that's fixed. I don't know how, but that seems dumb. I think you want to encourage players to try this new mechanic and not. Now, is that a technicality thing based on the rules?
I mean, technically, yeah, it would be.
Right.
I mean, because it's just a
So I don't.
matter of it inherits whatever's on the front-facing side of it. Um, yes and no. Yeah, yes and no, Alex. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on it overall, to be honest. I don't really care that much
Yeah,
about it.
I kind of hate it. But I think if your opponent is going to use a flicker effect on one of your lands and not to either save one of their things or kick off a combo or something on their side or an interaction, like that sucks, but that's not the worst thing that can happen. Now, if it's like a repeated, if you play a lot of these cards and they have some sort of permanent that flickers stuff, that would get really shitty. Say
Yeah.
it's non-permanent, can't enter play, so when it tries to put it back, it's gone. I prefer if they fell into grave. I would just prefer if it counted as a permanent. Like, I would
Well,
prefer
but
if
it
it
would.
counted,
Uh,
but
yeah, like if the rule was like slightly modified to say if you've already played it as a particular like one side for the term, but I don't know. That seems weird to me. I if they fell into
it's
the
just
grave, I think that'd be fine. Like I don't have a significant thing there. What
so
happened
like
in casual play?
the problem with it falling into the grave is if you have a really expensive card on one side and you play it for its land cost, you could flicker it into your grave and then cheat it out with something. And I mean, I don't see that happening really in standard. There's not like a shell to do
No.
that. Like if they printed this on some big beefy monster and you flickered your land to the graveyard, but then reanimated it, something like
Yeah.
that. But I would just prefer to it have the land side to have the characteristic of the land once it's played as a land. Like so that fixes so it's still not fetchable as the land, but it's treated as a permanent respective to its playability, like in the
Has
game. You know
as
what I
it's
mean?
been played. Yeah, I mean I get what you're saying. And I think that kind of makes
Because
sense.
I think that's the problem with they didn't want these cards to be fetchable via like land fetches, you
Yes.
know?
Which is smart.
Um, right, that makes sense. But I think once it's a land, treat it as a land and don't like punish players kind of backhandedly for playing them. And that's not necessarily like what happened. I think that's a rules thing, and like I
Yeah,
get
that's
it,
just a
but
rules technicality. And I don't know that there are only like a few. So, like in casual games, yeah, I mean, there's probably more that you would play, but like, there's not a ton of these flip land cards that are like absolutely amazing just because of one side of the
yeah,
card. Like I don't see a lot of them as being like all that powerful. What you get is a decent effect, albeit usually a little overcosted because of how powerful it is, and then on the backside the flexibility of the land. And so what you're getting out of it is the flexibility. And so I don't again because that's like that alone makes it something that I'm not going to like necessarily even try to abuse. Makes it really not matter that much in my opinion. Does that make
yeah,
sense? I think that makes
I'm
sense.
with it.
Um, And to your point, I don't know if Glasspool Mimic is abused. Alex, just a heads up. Let's see. Any play if the land was on the back, fight me. Alex, I'm kind of with you on that. I think some of them maybe, but very rarely. I don't think they're great by themselves. It's the flexibility that makes them good, in my opinion.
Shatterskull Smashing would be played.
I don't think it actually would be. So I listened to LSV talk about that card. And like
as like a 2-of.
Maybe it's
sideboard.
like a 2 of sideboard or something, but he was talking about as like a, yeah, and that's what was being talked about was as a main board, like, would this be a good removal spell? And it's like, I mean, it's okay. It's not great. Like, there's more efficient options that might do a little bit less, but they cost less mana, so you can do more in one turn, so you're going to do that.
And, like, probably not in Standard also. Like,
no,
you would play Seagate Restoration in EDH.
Yeah,
I have no doubt.
But that's a pretty abusable kind of card too.
Gives you no maximum hand size. It's a card draw spell.
Like that's something that really matters in EDH a lot. Like obviously it matters everywhere, but like that's abusable pretty heavily.
That's an engine to a win con in any deck that like has Laboratory Maniac is a win con in EDH.
Yeah.
Or cards like if you've drawn half your deck, you Seagate Restoration the rest of your deck and you win.
Yep.
Done.
So Cryptic Command if you only have one to do. Yeah, Alex, I mean that's a good point.
None of those effects would be 3 mana though.
Counter target spell has been 3 mana.
Okay, but like the counter spells that are
drawing one card for 3 is terrible.
But that's the thing is they've printed that spell before. You're just asking if you'd run counter spell, and the answer is no.
Yeah, the answer
like
is no.
None of those effects would be 3 mana.
No, not in a competitive environment. No.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
Yeah, Cryptic Command is untouchable. Don't you?
Cryptic Command's way good.
You can't lose if you're holding Cryptic Command. That is a rule.
Is that the rule?
Yeah. You at least have one more turn if you have Cryptic Command.
That's a good point.
Hey, there are exceptions, but fuck you, there's not.
Dude, speaking about modern staples really quick.
Yeah.
I opened up I against my better judgment, I bought a box of Modern Masters 2015 fairly recently. It's like notoriously the worst Modern Masters by a long way, but I opened one pack, and I've talked about this a couple times, and I'm still excited about it. I opened it. It did not have Cryptic Command, spoiler, but it did have a Mythic in it. It had Elesh Norn, which is, as you know, my favorite card.
But don't you have a set?
Oh, I've got like 6. But
okay, well.
I just love Elesh Norn. I've also got proxies. Shameless plug. If you want to pick up one of these awesome Elesh Norn proxies, you can totally do that at patreon.com/8resolves.
Hell yeah.
Anyway, but guess what the foil was?
I don't know. I don't remember the set list for 2015.
Tarmogoyf.
All right.
Got an Elesh Norn and a foil Goyf in the same pack. I was like, all right, well, I can't really hate the set anymore. Oh, wow. Yeah, same pack.
That's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. That's
that box pack, also had a Karn, and some other like decent stuff. Nothing really truly amazing, but like it turned out to be a pretty good box based on just that one pack alone.
Yeah, that's worth it.
Goyf's
still good. Not really.
It's not nearly as good as it used to be.
Fatal Push really kind of.
Fatal Push wrecked it. But a foil Goyf, still worth a little money, so I'm not upset about it.
And I still think you play Goyf if you're playing Jund, so that's fine.
Yeah.
It's going to be good. You have to make them kill it, and if they don't kill it, it's still just Tarmogoyf. So
yeah, I mean it's still just a big beater. So make them have the answer.
Right.
Awesome. Well, are there any other questions in chat, or is there anything else, Will, that you would like to mention before we head out?
Nah, I'm feeling good. We puddle hopped over all of these.
We did a little, yeah. But I actually thought they were really I feel pretty confident that those are really, really important things. Like, those are definitely the first things that I would think of when I'm trying to offer advice.
Understand and really like get half of them.
Yeah.
I think you're on your way.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And I think we did touch on a few things that we may try and break down even further in like dedicated podcast episodes. So do stay tuned for that. But overall, I just thought this was a fun episode. This was a really cool one to plan for, I thought.
I'm with it. That was a good time,
Awesome.
gents.
Well, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. I know a lot of people were lurking, but that's totally fine. We appreciate you hanging out and watching. Alex, great to have you here pretty much the whole time. And Blank Survivor, I saw you up there hanging out. We got a couple new follows as well, Pillar Wolf and Kentonite. Kentonite. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Thank you guys so much. Welcome to the community. We're certainly happy to have you. But thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And I think that's going to be it from us.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Bye.